The situation is not very good. They say one thing on television, and in reality it's another. There's plenty of people waiting in lines, whether there's gas, I don't know. People are queuing everywhere.
They say it's due to the frenzy, that people are to blame themselves.
Ourselves? They should just set a standard limit so everyone can fill up as much as they want. Simple as that. Instead, they limit it to 20 liters, so you just end up running back and forth constantly.
After months of Ukrainian strikes on oil refineries, depots, terminals and fuel infrastructure, Russia is now facing a summer fuel crisis. Not only in occupied Crimea, the shortage is now visible in Moscow. Fuel rationing has been introduced in many regions. Drivers are posting videos of empty pumps, closed stations and long queues. Some stations limit sales to 20 liters per car. Putin has already had to admit there is a problem, but he insists it's not critical.
These attacks on our facilities certainly create problems. That is obvious. We are currently seeing a certain shortage, though I would say it is not critical.
But the numbers are harder to soften. Since April, there have been more than 40 reported Ukrainian attacks on Russian territory. Some facilities have been hit more than once. The refinery in Tuapse on the Black Sea was struck 4 times in just over 2 weeks. In June, Russia processed 25% less crude oil into fuel than a year before. That is the lowest level in more than 20 years. Around a third of Russia's refining capacity is currently offline.
The general view is about a third is offline. That it comes at a very, I should say, critical time for the Russian economy, in that the agriculture season, particularly the harvest season, is now kind of starting to ratchet up. And this is the time of year when, in any event, there is a big demand for diesel from the agriculture sector.
In occupied Crimea, one farmer says work has stopped because there is no diesel to pump water or keep the farm running.
Everything has come to a standstill without fuel. I've sent everyone home. We can't work or do anything. I'm the only one left here, watering and feeding the animals by hand. We have a water reserve, enough to water the apple orchard 3 more times, and then we'll run out. We have a diesel-powered pump to draw water, but there is no diesel, so we can't pump it.
The fuel problem is also reaching basic services. In Russia's Zabaikalsky region, a waste management company warned that garbage trucks would temporarily stop operating in several districts because of a lack of fuel. Russian officials blame panic buying. They tell people to fill up only when they really need it. But panic does not damage refineries. Ukrainian drones do. And repairing them is not a quick thing.
You know, it's not something that can be done overnight in a country like Russia. The ministers have been over the weekend, you know, really laboring this point that it's going to take several weeks. There is fuel. There should be enough, but it will take several weeks to get it from where it is to where it's needed. And so it's just a huge logistics operation.
Even this is possible thanks to Ukraine's defense forces. So it is hardly surprising that Russians have started massively searching online for one question: when will the war against Ukraine finally end? The Institute for the Study of War drew attention to data from Russia's Yandex Word Stat service. In just 1 week, Russians made more than 130,000 searches asking when Russia will end its war against Ukraine. This is the highest number since the start of the full-scale invasion in 2022. It seems Ukrainian long-range strikes on Russia are putting more pressure on Russians' mind than the realization that their country has been killing Ukrainians for more than 10 years in a row.
The Russian population appears to be increasingly interested in the topic of the end of Russia's war against Ukraine. WordStat data shows that from June 22nd to June 28th, there were more than 137,000 Yandex searches asking when Russia will end its war against Ukraine. This is the highest number since the beginning of the full-scale invasion in February 2022. A significant share of these searches came from Moscow Oblast, St. Petersburg, and Leningrad Oblast. These are the very regions the Kremlin tried to cover with reinforced air defense systems. At the same time, it failed to fully protect them from Ukrainian long-range strikes. The number of searches about the end of the war has been growing for the second week in a row. The previous peak came in early June, when Ukrainian forces struck St. Petersburg during the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum.
Moscow is looking for gasoline imports. Putin's spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Russia is ready to import fuel if it can reach agreements at acceptable prices. Officially, the Kremlin calls this as a step to stabilize the market and reduce panic demand. And Moscow is now holding daily meetings on how to contain its fuel crisis. And then comes the second part of the Kremlin script. While Russia is looking for fuel abroad, Peskov is trying to shift attention to strikes on Moscow Oblast and is calling on the international community to condemn Ukraine.
Russia is ready to import petroleum products if agreements are found at acceptable prices. You know that the president held a meeting on Sunday about the situation in Russia's fuel sector, and you all saw the president's statement on this matter. A government working group is operating, a mission, call it whatever you want. Meetings on stabilizing the fuel market are taking place on a daily basis. We would once again like to use this opportunity to draw the attention of the international community to these criminal actions by the Kyiv regime. The death of a child in Yegoriyevsk is a direct consequence of Ukraine's criminal actions.
Russia is expanding the language it uses to justify the seizure of more Ukrainian territory. Russian propaganda now presents Putin's idea of a so-called buffer zone or sanitary zone as a response to Ukrainian strikes on Russian territory and cross-border operations in the Bryansk and Kursk regions. The areas mentioned in the context include Ukraine's Sumy, Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, and even part of the Mykolaiv region. Moscow claims this is needed to push Ukrainian forces and drone units away from Russia's border. But in practice, this creates a new political excuse for Russian troops to move deeper into Ukraine. The same logic was used before when Russia illegally declared Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions as a part of the Russian Federation, even though it is still does not fully control them. Now the Kremlin is applying a similar formula to other Ukrainian regions. First, it calls them a security threat, then it presents their occupation as a defense. Analysts at the Institute for the Study of War have repeatedly noted that Russia's territorial demands are detached from battlefield reality. And Putin is not reducing his goals because of military limits. He is expanding the political myth and trying to force the battlefield to follow it. Ukraine has signed a deal for Swedish Gripen fighter jets, aircraft designed for European war scenario and built with Russia in mind. Swedish defense company Saab will supply Ukraine with the 16 Gripen E multi-role fighters under a contract worth around $2.5 billion. The deal also includes technical support, which is crucial because fighter jets are not delivered as stand-alone machines. They come with a maintenance, training, spare parts, software, weapons integration, and years of operational work. The new Gripen E aircraft are expected in 2029 and 2030, but Ukraine may see Swedish jets earlier. For Ukraine, the Gripen matters because of how it was designed. Sweden built this aircraft for a possible confrontation with Russia, where large air bases could be targeted and pilots would need to operate from dispersed locations. That logic is very close to Ukraine's reality, where Russia constantly hunts airfields, radars, and aircraft infrastructure. During a meeting in Kyiv with a Swedish defense minister, Zelensky also discussed broader defense cooperation, including drones, air defense, and missile defense. Russian troops underwent covert military training in China. According to Reuters, the training was approved at a higher level in Moscow. A Russian document seen by the agency refers to a decision by Russian Defense Minister Andrei Belousov from August 2025. After that, a delegation from Russia's armed forces traveled to China for training at facilities of People's Liberation Army of China. One of the courses took place in Beijing. It focused on radiological, chemical, and biological protection. Russian soldiers were trained in chemical and radiation reconnaissance, shown a model nuclear reactor, and taught how to protect ventilation systems from contamination.
covert military training of Russian forces in China last year was personally approved by Vladimir Putin's defense minister. At least 4 Russian and Chinese generals were involved. A classified Russian document directly referred to an internal decree issued by Defense Minister Andrei Belousov in August 2025. It said that, in accordance with Belousov's decision, a delegation from Russia's armed forces traveled to China to participate in training exercises at People's Liberation Army facilities. One of the courses was a 3-week session focused on radiological, chemical, and biological protection. The documents described Russian soldiers being lectured by a Chinese instructor. They were shown a model nuclear reactor. They were also trained in chemical reconnaissance, radiation reconnaissance, and the protection of ventilation systems from contamination. China said the allegations were entirely unfounded.
Last month, Reuters already reported that China trained around 200 Russian military personnel in November. According to the agency, some of them later went to fight in the war against Ukraine. Ukraine's missiles now put almost half of Russia within reach. Bloomberg writes that Kyiv has sharply expanded the range and intensity of its strikes inside Russia, triggering missiles alerts across regions that used to feel far away from the war. This week alone, missiles warnings were declared in several regions southeast from Moscow, in the Volga Federal District, in Astrakhan, in the North Caucasus, in the central Russian regions including Moscow, Tambov, Orel, and Lipetsk. Ukraine has again struck the Ufa oil refinery more than 1,000 kilometers from the front line.
Ukraine has expanded the range and intensity of its missile strikes inside Russia, triggering alerts across nearly half of the regions in the world's largest countries so far this year. The scale and geographic reach of the attacks highlight how Ukraine's tactics and long-range strike capabilities have evolved as it attempts to bring the war closer to home for Russians. Earlier in the war, missile alerts were largely confined to Russian regions bordering Ukraine as well as Ukrainian territories occupied by Moscow's forces. This year, however, the areas that are home to more than 70% of the country's population have sounded the alarm at least once. Ukraine is increasingly relying on domestically developed long-range cruise missiles to complement its expanding fleet of attack drones. This gives Kyiv the ability to strike military and industrial targets over greater distances inside Russia. The Omsk region in western Siberia, nearly 3,000 kilometers east of the Ukrainian border, recorded its first missile alert in June.
That's all for now. Thank you for watching.